And it's one of the oldest missions in the world because, it's, like I said earlier, it was the first place where the 12 apostles went when Joseph sent them out to do missionary work. They all went to Sharon, Vermont, and then they spread out from there. The first, miracle in church history was Vinalhaven in Maine, where Wilford Woodruff came in and he taught, and it was about a third of the island converted, and they up and left. And so, like, there's a lot of church history and a lot of strong feelings about the church in the area, and it's really, it's just stoked in church history. I remember my first area in Sharon, we'd be walking down the street and all of a sudden we'd see a plaque and it'd be like, birthplace of Hiram Smith. And you're just like, are you for reals? You'd be sitting there and you'd be walking by and a member would be like, you see that building over there? We're like, yeah, the general store. And they're like, the old general store that stood right there is where Joseph Sr. proposed to Lucy Mack. And you're like, are you serious? And they're like, here, let me go show you their wedding certificate or registry in the town hall. And you go in there, you're like, can I see the most popular document you have? They're like, you want to see the Smith wedding? And you come in and you see it and you realize that was written 200 years ago. And all of a sudden church history becomes real. Because it's very easy to be like, well, this happened so long ago, and almost make it like a mythical thing, because we read a lot of books, but to actually serve in New England, it takes it from being a book like any other books to also something that's real. When you are, especially when you're at the birthplace of Joseph Smith, at the memorial there's no denying that he was a real person. And once you have to acknowledge that, you have to decide if he's a good person or a bad person. And the spirit there is so strong that you can't deny he was a good person. And if he was a good person, then why would he lie about being a prophet, unless he really was? And as a missionary, it was amazing to take people up to the memorial. I mean, I remember one lady, she was Catholic, and she's like, I don't believe in Joseph Smith. I won't believe in Joseph Smith. He's this and that. And we took her to the memorial, and immediately, like, her entire countenance changed. And we taught her a lesson at the foot of the hill with the memorial just up there on the hillside. And that next week, we committed her to baptism, and she's like, yeah, I'll do it. And she's active in the church. She's endowed, goes to temple, and it's just amazing to see how someone can go from completely not believing in him as a prophet to all of a sudden seeing that because of the history, and you can feel the spirit there testifying of the work of Joseph Smith. But it's also amazing because it's not just that. There's areas all over the mission that have that history going on. When you're serving up in the Down East Acadia region, up in northern Maine, they have Vinalhaven. And you have little plaques, Wilford Woodruff here baptized, like 100 people. And you're just like, dang. It also kind of sets up some interesting expectations. I remember the first day in the mission field, my mission president came up to me and gave my trainer, kind of like a dual hug. And he's like, Elder Goff, you're going to Sharon, Vermont. I served my mission in Sharon, Vermont. And I'm like, you did, President? He goes, yes. When I was a missionary, I served in this mission in Sharon, Vermont. I was there for 7.5 months. He looked at me and he's just like, all 12 of the original apostles served their mission in Sharon, Vermont. He's like, we found everyone we could. He goes, now go and try to find somebody yourself. And you're like, well, that's not a tall order. But it was amazing as you start studying church history, and you realize President Packer was a mission president up there. Brigham Young was born in New England. Joseph Smith was born in New England. Hiram, all these people started their roots in New England. And it's amazing when you realize that whereas the church is small in New England, there's only 5 stakes in our mission. 1 in Vermont, 1 in New Hampshire, 3 in Maine, and then a little bit of Massachusetts. And you see that, like, relatively speaking, that's small. I live in a town where there's 12 stakes. To go to a mission where there's 5 stakes, I was like, what's going on? But when you start realizing how many people had joined the church in that area who then carried it west, you realize if it wasn't for the New England stock, then the church wouldn't be around today. And so it was really amazing to realize how much those people had done to help further the work. And then to be able to not just understand that, but to see the history as you're walking down the streets was amazing. New England is a very interesting dynamic because in each of the different states, they act completely differently. In Vermont, people are very kept to themselves. They're very good people, but they don't talk about religion. That's one of the subjects that you just don't breach. And it's very heavily congregationalist. And when we start teaching people, it have a lot of backlash because they're like, our family's gone to this Congregationalist church since 1725. And you're like, you've gone to this church longer than our country's been a country? And it was crazy. And then you go from that to Maine, where in Maine they have a bunch of Pentecostal churches all over the place. They have mega churches. They've got ginormous Baptist churches and evangelical churches, and you're like, it's completely different atmosphere from the small white chapel of Vermont where people don't want to talk about religion, to Maine where people will walk up to you and they'll ask you a question. And you're just like what? Or people will make comments. I'd say that probably the most interesting dynamic in New England is how much opposition there is. I remember I was serving in Ellsworth, Maine. It was a branch. And within our branch boundaries, there was an entire stake of the Community of Christ, or the RLDS church, and there were 5 Jehovah's Witness congregations. And so it was an uphill battle. Everyone thought we were either Community of Christ or Jehovah's Witness. And to try to explain to them that who we really were and what we were offering them was hard. But it was amazing to see when people gave us a chance, how else they're like, where have you been this whole time? Like, we've been knocking on your door all the time. You just haven't answered. And it was really cool. But then in the southern end of our mission, you have the areas approaching Boston, and they're either extremely Catholic or extremely atheist. Portland, Maine, Manchester, New Hampshire, and those bigger cities are some of the least religious cities in America. I mean, our mission contained 5 of the 6 least religious cities in America. And it was interesting being called to share the gospel with them, because from my experience, it wasn't because they didn't believe in God. It's just that the God they were taught is unbelievable in. I mean, who would want to believe in a God who would treat his children that way? And I remember so many times I'd seek out the atheists. They called me the Jehovah's Witness seeker and the atheist seeker on our mission, because I love to teach them. And I remember teaching one, an atheist, and he was 90 years old. We were in Cornish, Maine. And he just looked at me and he's like, I've had so many pastors try to talk to me and save me throughout my days. I used to teach in Portland at the middle school. He goes, this is the first time anyone's explained a God that I could actually believe in. And it was amazing to teach the plan of salvation to these people who had written off there being anything because they couldn't understand why and how a God would work if it was in the way the other religions taught. And then when we taught them the plan of salvation, there's like, this actually could be real. You're making me question 90 years of my life and my beliefs from one evening of learning about the gospel. And they're like, of course you can come back. I want to figure this out. And it was amazing to see that change, because when most people say atheist, they think of hardcore people, or they think of protesters at Temple Square during General Conference. But in my experience, a lot of them are some of the best people I've met. They're looking for the truth, and they're not willing to settle for a substitute. So I started my mission in Sharon, Vermont. I was there for 7.5 months. I then went to Bangor, Maine. I was there for 6 months. After Bangor, I went to Ellsworth, Maine, which is right along the coast, and I was there for 6 months. And then after that, I was in Gardner and Augusta, Maine area for 3 months, and then I finished my mission on a border town of Maine and New Hampshire called Cornish, Maine. And so we covered half in New Hampshire, half in Maine, and so that was where I served.